CD 16.
Nevertheless, the Rajah's excitement and insistence proves irresistible, and it is a bemused if confused Captain Cook who that day welcomes the Rajah and Mynheer Lange and their surprisingly large retinue aboard for lunch. Of course, for such an occasion they must empty the last of the cellar's wines, and have the next to last of their ship's animals slaughtered. At the first taste of the wine, the Rajah seems most gratified, even commenting, "I do not imagine that you who are white men would suffer me, who is black, to sit down in your company." Taken aback, Cook assures him that their ship and table is made all the more resplendent with his presence. Everyone assembled begins to drink, and in short order the remainder of the Endeavour's food is brought out. The Rajah has never eaten such delicacies. What is this? Mutton. What does it come from? Sheep. "I desire to have English sheep," the Rajah suddenly says, with the barest trace of menace as to what will happen if he does not get it. Captain Cook hesitates, as there is but a single sheep left. Yet trade is their only avenue, their only path forward, and if their last sheep must be sacrificed, it is a small price to pay. "Hand it over, men." "So be it. Now we can get on with the trade." "I desire an English dog," now cries the Rajah, a single four-legged beast not quite enough for him. Well, Mr. Banks has a dog, a beautiful one at that. 2 even. Surely he could part with 1. A terribly reluctant Mr. Banks considers the proposition, though ultimately presents one of his greyhounds as a present for the Rajah. "There you are, sir. Take good care of him, won't you?" The Rajah is ecstatic, and brings an end to the lunch and his requests by assuring the assembled company that tomorrow morning, at the beach, they will have buffaloes, sheep, hogs, and fowls. The Rajah is seen off with a 3-gun salute, the sound almost drowned out by the cheers from the men as he is rowed back ashore. The ship's company all sleep well that night, dreaming of the breakfast they have secured for themselves tomorrow morning. The sun rises to reveal the beach full of nothing. Sand and seaweed aplenty, a little driftwood but no buffaloes, no hogs, no natives, no coolies driving their flocks and herds forward. Underwhelmed but careful not to jump to conclusions, Captain Cook and Mr. Banks go ashore to the Grand Palace, which, now that they look at it for themselves, is not so grand at all. Some questioning reveals that it is a public assembly room, not a palace. Captain Cook can feel a prickling sensation rising to a flushed heat. And yet, as the captain feels his temper rising within, suddenly a miracle. Here comes the Rajah now. "Gentlemen, a terrible misunderstanding has taken place, a mistake that must be fixed. Yes, everything we promised will be here, but not today. It will all be here tomorrow." Captain Cook and Joseph Banks are reticent, and yet, despite their suspicions, the Rajah soon has the captain, the botanist, and the majority of the crew in a large house, sitting before an excellent meal of dripping, succulent pork and ruby-red wine that is being passed briskly about, when Mr. Lange appears, suddenly with a letter in hand. Bad news. It's from the governor of Timor, the Rajah explains, and you'll find that it says, "We can't trade with you." The livestock is ready, so are the vegetables and fruits, but a Dutch ship is due in port this day, and the governor has already promised them supplies as well. It just wouldn't be proper to trade with the Englishmen before the next visitors arrive. "No matter," says Lange. "He will sort it out himself, if only the captain will afford him some more time." James Cook is tired of these delays, but once again finds himself without an alternative. "Fine, Lange. Go and sort it out." Lange returns with the result, claiming he has secured a bevy of buffalo for the Englishmen to collect this very evening. "We shouldn't worry about such things, not when the sun is high, in the sky, and wine flows freely, so feels the representative of the Dutch East India Trading Company. The lunch drags on to the evening, at which point the crew, well fed and watered, stumble back to the ship, eager to see the fresh produce Lange has left them on the shore. Approaching the beach, a sense of déjà vu grips the crew. For the second time today, the beach is bare. Captain Cook sends a message as quickly as he can, demanding to know the meaning of this. Lange responds that it is no more than another misunderstanding, a hiccup, really. Lange insists that he understands the captain's frustrations, that he is also upset, but truly, what can he do? He is no more than a middleman. Maybe if they try again tomorrow, the governor of Timor may be able to smooth things over with another letter. Oh, and on that note, the natives would prefer gold to bartering. Perhaps you Englishmen should bring gold with you. Though they are entirely sheepless, the captain and his gentlemen are quite certain that they have been fleeced. Cook has had it. Tomorrow will be different. The next morning, James Cook wakes to see great brown shapes lumbering about the beach. Buffaloes. Finally, the trade they have been promised is within sight, though precious little does it calm the captain's frustrations. He is too wise to think that everything will continue unabated, and rows ashore with his guard up, their boats laden with gold and muskets. This time, the well-travelled and Dutch-speaking Dr. Solander is in tow, ready to interpret and cut through any potential language barriers. The first native is approached. "How about 3 guineas for a buffalo?" "No sale." "All right then, a musket for a buffalo." "No, thank you." Dr. Solander inquires as to why they won't trade. "Mr. Lange has told us not to." He takes a cash commission on each and every purchase, and he has left specific instructions to ask 5 guineas per buffalo. Not only that, but the Rajah is in on it as well. He skims off the top the same as Lange. A protection racket here at the end of the earth. Furious that 3 precious days have been wasted entertaining charlatans and cheats, Cook decides to introduce some good old-fashioned free-market capitalism. Why bow down to these meddling middlemen? 5 guineas for the first buffalo, and a musket for each one thereafter. Say you natives wouldn't mind a few firearms, would you? In a matter of moments, literal herds of buffalo are brought onto the beach, and the Englishmen are given their pick of the litter. Just don't tell Johann or that Rajah. There's no reason for them to find out. The Endeavour stocks up with a mass of supplies, as Banks records, 8 buffaloes, 30 dozen of fowls, 6 sheep, 3 hogs, some few but very few limes and coconuts, a little garlic, a good many eggs, an immense quantity of syrup, which was bought for trifles, several hundred gallons at least, upon the whole more than livestock enough to carry us to Batavia. Now fully stocked with chooks, cheek by beak, and all the rest squashed in together, all prepared for the journey ahead. Cook is delighted with what proves to be the cherry on top. It is Johann Lange, sprinting in an ungainly fashion across the beach. By the time he reaches the white men, he is out of breath. "Captain Cook, I'm terribly sorry. There seems to have been another All that Cook understands is that Johann Lange is too late. Oh yes, his voice is now all sweetness and softness, when in the past it had been as sour as verjuice. But the damage has been done. Lange prattles on about riches untold if we might come ashore the next day. But the proverbial ship has sailed, in much the same way the real one is about to. As Banks tells it, our business was quite done. And he is as thrilled as the captain to sail away from the scams of Savu and its so-called Rajah. At least the men now have plenty of fresh greens and meat to help restore their health in relatively short time. 7th of October, 1770. Batavia, Port of Death. There is always a fraught moment when European ships arrive in foreign colonies after a long time spent at sea with no contact. Has, perchance, war been declared between the ship's home country and the colonial power whose port this is? Are soldiers about to storm aboard to take the crew and the ship into custody? But no, as the Endeavour arrives in the Dutch port of Batavia on this day, all seems sleepy and calm. A lone Dutch ship does indeed come out to block their approach, but instead of soldiers and marines forcing their way on board, it gives birth only to a small longboat with a large Dutch pennant, from which steps a rather scrawny Dutch official with several even more scrawny underlings and sundry sailors asking them their purpose in these parts, how long they intend to stay, and so forth. As the Dutchman speaks, the men of the Endeavour keep staring at the Dutch entourage. For look at this official and his men. Both himself and his people were almost as spectres, Joseph Banks notes. No good omen of the healthiness of the country we were arrived at. Our people, however, who truly might be called rosy and plump, for we had not a sick man among us, jeered and flouted much at their brother seamen's white faces. Captain Cook himself is no less than proud of the health of his men, pointing out for the Admiralty that Lieutenant Hicks, Mr. Green, and Tupaia were the only people that had any complaints occasioned by a long continuance at sea. But yes, noting the sickly pallor of the Batavia officials, with the only colour coming from the greenness of their gills, Cook resolves to move as swiftly as possible to get his men back on the open sea again as soon as it can be done. Indeed, if not for the mishap and near shipwreck on the reef, they would have been able to bypass Batavia entirely. But the Endeavour needs full repairs that only a European outpost can provide in order to journey back across the world to England. At noon on the 9th of October, Captain Cook receives permission to enter the port from the Dutch officials and sails the Endeavour towards the harbour, at length standing in Batavia Road. "I sent Lieutenant Hicks ashore," Captain Cook chronicles, "to acquaint the governor of our arrival, and to make an excuse for not saluting. As we could only do it with 3 guns, I thought it was better let alone." Next, Captain Cook summons his carpenter, Mr. Satterley, to deliver his list of the ship's deficiencies. The defects of His Majesty's bark Endeavour. The ship very leaky, as she makes from 12 to 6 inches water per hour, occasioned by her main keel being wounded in many places. The false keel gone beyond the midships from forward and perhaps further, as I had no opportunity of seeing for the water when hauled ashore for repair. Wounded on her starboard side under the main chains, where I imagine is the greatest leaks, but could not come at it for the water. One pump on the starboard side useless, the others decayed within 1.5 inches of the bore, otherwise masts, yards, boats, and hull in pretty good condition. Dated in Batavia Road this 10th of October 1770, J. Satterley. In the meantime, Dutch carpenters take a look at the ship too. They gravely inform Captain Cook that the repairs required for the Endeavour are even more extensive and expensive than first thought. First things first, at precisely 5 p.m. on Friday, the 12th of October, the smiling James Cook is introduced to the Governor-General, who received me very politely and told me that I should have everything I wanted. And yet, that very evening, something happens which is almost a symbol of how potentially dangerous this place is, how disaster might strike at any moment any of them, and it is only for the gods to decide who they will smite. In the middle of a fierce storm, lightning strikes and destroys instantly the 2 main masts of the Dutch ship standing next to the Endeavour in port. Cook, a man of science, regards it with interest as a lesson. She, the Dutch ship, had had an iron spindle at the main topgallant masthead, which had first attracted the lightning. The ship lay about 2 cable lengths from us, and we were struck with the thunder at the same time, and in all probability we should have shared the same fate as the Dutchman, had it not been for the electrical chain which we had but just before got up, This carried the lightning or electrical matter over the side clear of the ship. The shock was so great as to shake the whole ship very sensibly. This instance alone is sufficient to recommend these chains to all ships whatever, and that of the Dutchman ought to caution people from having iron spindles at their mastheads. Typically for James Cook, it is not enough that disaster has been averted. As conscientious as ever, he must do what he can so others can also be spared. As to how Captain Cook will pay for the repairs and victuals, he discovers no private means whereby an advance of money could be sought to cover the Endeavour's repair, and so he pens a formal epistle to the Governor. Lieutenant James Cook, commander of His Britannic Majesty's bark the Endeavour, begs leave to represent to His Excellency the Right Honourable Petrus Albertus van de Para, Governor-General, etc., etc., that he will be in want of a sum or sums of money in order to defray the charge he will be at in repairing and refitting His Britannic Majesty's ship at this place. Which sum or sums of money he is directed by his instructions and empowered by his commission to give bills of exchange on the respective officers which superintend His Britannic Majesty's Navy. The said Lieutenant James Cook requests of His Excellency that he will be pleased to order him to be supplied with such sum or sums of money either out of the company's treasure, or permit such private persons to do it as may be willing to advance money for bills of exchange on the honourable and principal officers and commissioners of His Britannic Majesty's Navy, the commissioners for victualling His Majesty's Navy, and the commissioners for taking care of the sick and hurt. Dated on board His Britannic Majesty's bark, the Endeavour, in Batavia Road, 16th of October, 1770. James Cook. On the 18th of October, the Endeavour is anchored off Cooper's Isle, lying off the mainland in the western side of the bay, a 10-acre patch of land where the Dutch keep much of their spices in long warehouses that lie parallel to each other, while Cook arranges for some space to be allotted to land the ship's stores. After several days, the necessary orders are in place, and on the 23rd of October they land the stores. Here is where the hard work begins. William Perry writes, "The vessel was hauled up and lashed head and stern, alongside the jetty or wharf, immediately dismantled, her stores all lodged ashore." Divested of her finery, the ship's hull is then kept in readiness for warping over to the nearby island of Onrust for careening and repairs. A caretaker crew is brought aboard. Most of the ship's company are able to pitch tents on Cooper's Isle, in the shade, 'neath a grove of trees, by a wharf, a perfect place to take their rest, idly watching the coolies constantly unloading some ships of spices while loading others. Captain Cook's servants erect a large marquee in which the captain may work in airy comfort, and a tent for him to sleep in. Sidney Parkinson, meanwhile, free from all ship-related duties, strolls around the city, writing enthusiastically of the scene. "The roads which lead from the city are many, and as good as ours in England. They extend a long way into the country, and are so many avenues planted with tamarind, cocoa, pisang, breadfruit, jaca, durium, and alango trees, which render them very pleasant. There's a great number of villas all along these roads, many of which have a magnificent appearance. In brief, the whole country looks like a garden, divided into different plantations by hedgerows of trees and canals which are so convenient and enrich the views of the country." For Joseph Banks, the time of restoration in a European port will be spent in his usual way, leisure and pleasure, as much as either can prove possible in a place like Batavia. Having spent the first few days exploring this European outpost, Banks is feeling a little more assured, though still with certain misgivings. "Being now a little settled, I hired a small house next door to the hotel on the left hand, for which I paid 10 rix, £2 a month. Here our books, etc., were lodged, but here we were far from private, every Dutchman almost that came by running in and asking what we had to sell, for it seems that hardly any individual had ever been at Batavia before who had not something or other to sell. It is time to send for Tupaia, who has remained on board the ship owing to his bilious illness. Frail and pale, the Tahitian steps from the Endeavour longboat onto the Batavia dock and looks around in sheer astonishment, as does young Taieto, who has come with him. The streets, the houses, the lanterns in the middle of the night. It is an astonishment that only grows in Tupaia and Taieto as they slowly follow Banks's servant, young John Roberts, through the port town. Yes, of course, the white men have previously told them stories about streets, wide pathways covered so completely with flat rocks that they are hard all over, free from any soft dirt. And they have equally told the Tahitians about houses that are entirely made out of flat rocks, called bricks. But nothing could have prepared them for the wonder of what they see now. The brightly coloured clothing of all the people, tigers in cages, the huge stone walls of the fort with scampering monkeys atop, a bridge that lifts up so ships can pass by, the grand houses higher than 10 huts, the carriages drawn by these extraordinary beasts called, how do you say it, horses? Rivers built by men that run absolutely straight, which they call canals. Tupaia and Taieto are every bit as enchanted with the Dutch stronghold as the Englishmen had been with the Arcadian wonder of Tahiti. Everything fascinates them. Tupaia's own presence is less remarked upon by the locals in regarding him, as there really are people here from all over the world. Though the Dutch are masters, the greater part of the inhabitants serving the company are Germans, Danes, Swedes, and Hungarians, all with their own style of dress, most of it colourful. The men are dressed excessively gay, Sidney Parkinson observes, having silk and velvet garments, richly laced and embroidered with laced hats and finely dressed wigs. Not that any of the Europeans or natives seem to do much hard work. That is reserved for the ubiquitous Chinese, who, the way Banks sees it, are remarkable for both their work ethic and lack of ethics generally. There is nothing, he notes, be it of what nature it will, clean or dirty, honest or dishonest, which a Chinese will not readily do for money. They work diligently and laboriously, loath to lose sight of their main point, money-getting. No sooner do they leave off work than they begin to game, either at cards, dice, or some one of the 1,000 games they have which are unknown to us in Europe. In short, it is as extraordinary a sight to see a Chinaman idle as it is to see a Dutchman or Indian at work. All up, it is an extraordinarily cosmopolitan settlement, with so many people from so many lands, and, in that case, Tupaia says, he no longer wishes to wear the suit of the English sailor. He is a proud Tahitian man, and wishes to dress like a Tahitian. Very well, then. South Sea cloth was sent for on board, Banks notes, and he clothed himself according to his taste. The simple fact of being back on land, once more in his native dress, seems to act as a tonic for Tupaia, and he even agrees to do something that Banks has been begging him to do for weeks: eat. For there are plantains, breadfruit, cocoa-nuts, foods that Tupaia is more accustomed to, and scarfs down heartily, and so his health improves as the days pass by. Captain Cook is relieved at Tupaia's seeming recovery. On the general subject of health, Captain Cook recorded a very noteworthy thing which he had neglected to put in his log upon arrival, but now wished to bring to the Admiralty's attention. I had forgot to mention that upon our arrival here, I had not one man upon the sick list. And yet, Despite their early impressions of Batavia being an outpost of sunny civilization, a place for recovery and restoration, they come to understand it is also a place where illness and death are so commonplace they are barely remarked upon. It is hardly a piece of news, Banks notes, to tell anyone of the death of another unless the dead man is of high rank or somehow concerned in money matters with the other. With everyone else, there is little more than a tired shrug, or an expressed regret that they hadn't got from him the money he owed before he died. After all, it is a very bad, sad sign that, as Mr. Banks notices while passing, the local graveyard has a series of fresh graves already dug, in the sure knowledge that they would soon be filled, like a macabre beach waiting for the inevitable tide of death to come in and leave its weekly wash-up of the damned. It is the quintessential port of death. The quiet Quaker, Sidney Parkinson, has his own ideas, tending to lay blame for the various fluxes in great measure on effluvia. With good reason, he suspects it's the city's picturesque canals that are the problem. In the dry season, they stagnate, become putrid, and, being exhaled by the sun, the air is charged with noxious vapours. It is these vapours, the pestilent stinking airs that rise from the city's stagnant and festering canals, coming complete with buzzing, biting insects, that brings typhus and malaria, which do all the damage. And yet, due to the care of the men taken by Captain Cook over the last 2 years, his insistence on hygiene, sauerkraut, gathering greens, he is confident that his own men will withstand the local fevers and fluxes. His ship's company are not thin, sickly skeletons with death's head grimaces like the Batavia residents. They are hale and hearty sailors. The locals know better and say so, telling Captain Cook, Banks and the senior men that it is because of the men's health and heartiness the plague will most heartily attack them. Banks, for one, does not believe it, noting that this threat, however, we did not much regard, thinking ourselves too well seasoned to a variety of climates to fear any. Camping on Cooper's Isle, many of the ship's company are beginning to ail. This is no easy place to be, and the weather is infernal, as Surgeon's Mate Perry records. Now and then we had a thunderstorm, and about once a week or oftener there fell heavy rain. Hardly one evening shut in without some kind of lightning in view. During the showers our tent let water through wholesale, and on such occasions we get fairly washed out. Compounding the problem is a pack of wild dogs that roam the island, though the men are soon able to fix that problem. As summer approaches and the days get warmer and wetter, the tropical torpor of the place, not to mention the sheer stench, starts to weigh on them all. For in truth, the place actually starts to stink like a dead dog in a rancid, stagnant sewage canal, rotting in the blistering afternoon sun, and for very good reason. There are dozens of such canals, with many dozens of such dead dogs lying in pools of human excrement, and, for newcomers like Cook's men uninitiated to it, it can hit you in the head like a dead dog rotting, in a pool of shit. Look, it wouldn't be so bad if the contents of the canal stayed put, but when the torrential rain comes at night, the canals then overflow, throwing the mud and dogs into the street, whereupon the locals pile it all up in the middle of the street to dry. Every now and then, a stupefied Banks chronicles while holding a silk handkerchief to his nose, a dead horse or hog stranded in the shallow parts of the canals appears, a nuisance which, as I was informed, no particular person was appointed to remove, which account I am inclined to believe, as I remember a dead buffalo laying in one of the principal streets of Thoroughfare for more than a week, which was at last carried away by a flood. The result, as the men of the Endeavour are told by the locals, is that for every 100 soldiers who arrive here from Europe, it is a rare thing for 50 to outlive the first year, and of those 50, half will at that time be in the hospitals, and of the other half, not 10 in perfect health. The captain himself will lament the unwholesome air of Batavia, which I firmly believe is the death of more Europeans than any other place upon the globe. They must take care, as the spectre looms of having survived the entire perilous voyage through storms, reefs, and battling natives, only to be struck down at one of the last ports, and a European port at that. Mid-October 1770, Batavia. Monkey business. Joseph Banks, as ever, is still eager to experience everything he can that is novel and new, something that they just won't believe once he gets back to London and can hold court once more. Having a meal of roasted monkeys? Banks accepts the invitation from a friendly Dutchman immediately, as do Captain Cook and Dr. Solander. The voyage has truly turned out to be an endeavour of culinary discovery. There is one problem, however. As they cross the courtyard to the house where they will dine, Banks sees half a dozen of those poor little devils, clearly of the genus macaca, lying helpless on their backs, their little arms tied tightly to cross sticks behind their backs. They make a high-pitched crying sound, "Kara! Kara! Kara!" as they lie there, looking up at the prospective diners beseechingly. Clearly, these are the ones who are about to be slaughtered to make their meal. Now, Banks will later recount, as I love all sorts of animals, I walked up to them and, in consequence of their plaintive chattering and piteous looks, I could not resist cutting the strings by which they were bound, and they immediately scampered off, so that we lost our monkey dinner. Banks tells nobody about this soft-hearted monkey business, especially not their host, who is left to wonder about the extraordinary dexterity of these tasty escapees. At least the conversation over the dinner is good, and Mr. Banks hears an amazing story he will long treasure. For it turns out that the French navigator, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, commanding the French expeditionary ships La Boudeuse and Étoile, had indeed been the European vessels that had visited a different part of Tahiti after the Dolphin and before the Endeavour. But here is the best part. For don't you know that Capitaine de Bougainville's head botanist, Philbert de Commerson, oh, how Mr. Banks loves this, had had his mistress on board with him, as his assistant botanist. Jean Barret had kept her identity hidden from the crew for half the voyage, in part by binding her breasts tightly flat with bandages, and had only been exposed in Tahiti, when the Tahitians had worked it out within minutes. A priceless story, which sets the envious Banks to thinking. In the meantime, the Dutch are eager to get as many Englishmen as possible into much safer accommodation. And yet the half-annoyed, half-amused Joseph Banks notes the ceaseless Batavian generosity comes at a very heavy price, most particularly when he and his entourage move into a private home. The fee for a place to sleep is not just steep, it is a sheer cliff. All 5 of them must pay each 2 rix dollars in the local currency, the equivalent of 8 shillings per day. Every visitor that dines at their table must pay 1 rix dollar, 4 shillings, for dinner, and another for supper, and bed if he stayed ashore. This, Banks discovers, is more than double the common charges of boarding and lodging in the town. But those rates only apply to those who have a choice, and the men of the Endeavour don't. There seems to be a tacit understanding among the Dutch that the British are to be treated like fat turkeys with their feet caught in a trap, to be first plucked and then eaten at will. When they squeal, it's just a bonus. And if they don't pay up beforehand, there is to be no cooperation at all. This Dutch way with the English is, as the resigned 20-year-old Mr. Leith, the only Englishman who lives on the island, explains, the method of living in Batavia. It is all so wretched. Captain Cook used to hold the Dutch people in such high regard. After all, it had been Captain Samuel Holland, one of their number, who had been his teacher in how to survey and draw perfect maps. He had been generous to a fault, and caring. But these Dutchmen use their instruments to draw up perfectly ridiculous bills. Still, it can't be avoided. In the end, even this far from home and hearth, James Cook must observe some words of resignation from his Yorkshire childhood. There's nought to do but wait. And so it goes. Nevertheless, he is unsure how to use this time of enforced leisure, so in typically industrious fashion, and with the help of his newly trimmed clerk, Richard Orton, he busies himself with making a copy of his journals and important maps thus far, and sends them to the Admiralty Secretary, Mr. Stevens, on the next ship to depart Batavia. Cook is sure to put a note with it that is not only modest, but also seeks to head off possible criticism. After all, the transit of Venus measurements vary to a distressing degree, and there has been no sign of the great southern land he had been sent to find. Although the discoveries made in this voyage are not great, yet I flatter myself that they are such as may merit the attention of their lordships. And although I have failed in discovering the so much talked of southern continent, which perhaps does not exist, and which I myself had much at heart, yet I am confident that no part of the failure of such discovery can be laid to my charge. Had we been so fortunate not to have run ashore, much more would have been done in the latter part of the voyage than what was. But as it is, I presume this voyage will be found as complete as any before made to the South Seas on the same account. For let the record show, and this time he cannot help but let his pride show through, I have the satisfaction to say that I have not lost one man by sickness during the whole voyage. Ah, but how long can that last, Captain Cook? For as the days pass, searing October turning to stinking hot November, it is clear that sickness is indeed starting to take the men of the Endeavour, one by one, then two by two, and now whole swathes go down. Some rally after a few days. Others continue their descent. In the latter group, one man in particular of the Endeavour who, despite his original invigoration at the sight of Batavia, has quickly taken ill once more, but in an even worse fashion. Refusing to take medicine because he simply doesn't trust any remedy or food that he has not seen before is Tupia. He grew worse and worse every day, Banks chronicles. Then Tyato, his boy, was attacked by a cold and inflammation on his lungs. Then my servants, Peter and James, and myself had intermitting fevers, and Dr. Solander a constant nervous one. Among those who remain on Cooper's Isle, one young man who has just taken violently ill and is of particular interest to Captain Cook because he knows his father is Isaac Manley. Perhaps Cook floats the idea to William Perry we should summon a local doctor from nearby Onrust Island, a doctor who could also be consulted in the case of Charles Clerk, who lately has begun suffering an agonizing pain in one eye. Quietly, surgeon's mate Perry thinks not. For one, he is fairly sure that his own left elbow knows more about medicine than any of the local fraternity, and when it comes to Mr. Clerk, he already has him well in hand, persevering with a course of bleeding that has only seen him faint once. Nevertheless, Captain Cook will not be denied, and eventually a doctor is summoned, who diagnoses Clerk's complaint and prescribes, as there is no cure, opium to make death easy. So much for medical help from Onrust, writes Perry. Before long, however, just about everyone on shore and most of those still on board are ill, with a variety of fevers and illnesses. Even Banks's health begins to spiral dangerously downwards, and he suffers a series of fits, which were so violent as to deprive me entirely of my senses, and leave me so weak as scarcely to be able to crawl downstairs. His servants, Peter and James, are just as bad, as is the doctor. Banks, however, as always using his own ingenuity, begins a regime of imbibing a tincture of Peruvian bark, with the aim of keeping the dreaded disease at bay. he remains the exception to the rule. When astronomer Charles Green starts to fall ill, he makes no alterations to his daily regime and continues to saunter the streets of Batavia, oblivious to all but the nighttime stars. But worst of all is Surgeon Monkhouse, who is confined to his bed with a fever. So bad is the surgeon that he barely reaches for his snuff-box anymore. Even the bastion of health, Captain Cook, also begins to ail. It is now so difficult to find a healthy Englishman on the island that they take turns as doctor and patient. In the first month, in Batavia, surgeon's mate William Perry writes, every man, 2 or 3 excepted, had been alternately the nurse or the nursling of his messmate. As weeks ran on, I found that we grew more prone to disease. The changes of the moon had very sensible effects, and even the flood tide constantly rendered fever or local pains more severe. We struggled on, whilst death was making quicker progress at Batavia. Unfortunately for Captain Cook and the crew of the Endeavour, the first man to die is the one they can least afford to lose, as chronicled by the captain. Wednesday, 7th of November, 1770. Employed getting ready to heave down in the PM. We had the misfortune to lose Mr. Monkhouse, the surgeon, who died at Batavia of a fever after a short illness, of which disease and other several of our people are daily taken ill. Surgeon Monkhouse has sniffed his last, his life-light snuffed out forever. While young Jonathan Monkhouse grieves over his elder brother, Captain Cook goes to find William Perry at Cooper's Isle, formally advising him of his informal appointment to the more senior role. And yes, it has to remain informal, because, as Perry will recount, our captain now discovered, if not sooner, that his commission, though conferring command of the vessel and her crew, did not contain any delegated power to fill up vacancies. Such was a strange omission of the Admiralty. Captain Cook does, nevertheless, present Perry with a warrant of surgeon, a letter confirming his appointment that will hopefully be formalised and recognised by the Admiralty on their return. He, furthermore, as Perry will note, said some handsome things, the more flattering from him who was endued by nature very sparingly with courteous and complimentary manners. Captain Cook charges Perry with looking after all the sick, and treats him with something like elaborate respect, all the more notable for Perry because, up to the ship's arrival at Batavia, hunger and health had held both doctor and doctor's mate as persons of very little use. In particular myself, the captain seemed to consider as one of the king's hard bargains, an eternal idler, and like a fifth wheel to a coach, of much the same service to a ship. Ah, but look at him now. Not only is he dealing with matters of life and death, but his own ministrations are now regarded as the difference between the two. It is strange, he reflects, how things turn. For yes, while John Satterley's carpentry skills had made him a hero after they had hit the great reef of New Holland, here at Batavia, awash in Dutch carpenters, well, just how can he put this? The carpenter, from being the great man, from being all in all, sunk into comparative insignificance, while little Bolus, Pillmonger and Clysterpipe, arose into the bygone greatness of our Mr. Satterley, in seriousness a most worthy and respectable man. So it is that even as the Endeavour is being restored to relatively robust good health, her crew is daily ravaged and ruined. Aware that it is their surroundings that are likely taking them down, 2 of the few who are not sick, Master's mate Dick Pickersgill and Midshipman John Booty, do a little exploring in their small boat, and are taken by the charms of the nearby island of Palmerant. Yes, there is the fact that it has a lepers' colony, but they are starting from such a low base that everything looks like up to them. Alas, while there, they feast upon the nuts of a certain shrub, Jatropha curcas, the physic nut, toxic to humans and stock animals alike, and the results are devastating. Mrs. Pickersgill and Booty made free with the kernels without clearing the skins away, Perry notes. Sudden and potent that proved first as an emetic, ending in a purgative. The lax continued after a fortnight and wasted both men to shadows. Perry does everything possible for them. As for all the others, dispensing Peruvian bark, bleeding the worst of them, giving them as much water as they will take, and getting the worst of the patients lifted on canvas and put outside their tents to get as much fresh air as possible, away from the vapours killing them. And, for the lucky ones, a slow recovery beneath the shady trees. And yet, whatever the skills of Mr. Perry, crew member after crew member falls ill and quickly dies, with the pale, weakened survivors wondering at every funeral just who among them will be next. Many suspect it will be Tupaia and Tayato, who are getting worse every day, battling a kind of dysentery completely unknown in the South Pacific, with the younger one, Tayato, saying frequently in his half-delirium, "Tayo mateoi, my friends, I am dying." And he really is. Beyond everything else, Tupaia is desperately homesick, regretting in the highest degree that he had left his own country. To compare the green splendour, white beaches and fresh breezes of his native land with the tropical torpor of this horrid place, the dead dogs, the stinking carcasses of oxen in the street, the wonder of the place had soon faded, is to die by degrees. "Please," he begs Joseph Banks, "put me back on the Endeavour, which will at least get me out of this land of sickness." Banks, very ill himself, declines, though at least promises Tupaia that a special sick tent will be set up for him on shore, where the breeze can soothe his fever. Tupaia is even able to pick the spot himself, in a place he chose where both sea breeze and land breeze blew right over him, a situation in which he expressed great satisfaction. Many of the sick seamen seek the same solution, and they now fell sick so fast that the tents ashore were always full of sick. Alas, poor Tayato succumbs to his illness, and on the 9th of November he breathes his last. William Perry provides a tender narrative to Tayato's death. The death, unexpected, of a lively boy, of ingenuity and manners to deserve his master's regard. A short illness hurried him off, and he died like a patriarch, taking leave of us pathetically, each by his name. Goodbye, Toot. Goodbye, Mr. Banks. Goodbye. And Tayato farewells no more, rasps no more, and weeps no more for his homeland, which is more than can be said of Joseph Banks, as he holds the child's hand even in death, and shakes with sadness. It is now the melancholy duty of Banks to journey down to the shore to break the news as gently as he can to Tupaia. Alas, such news has a far from gentle reaction, and Tupaia immediately weeps and cries out, "Tayato! Tayato!" over and over. Tupaia insists that the boy's body be removed to his own tent, that he might chant a certain funereal or death song in his country's fashion. It is a woeful incantation that unnerves Banks and surprises him, for when Tayato had been alive, Tupaia had not been above listing the shortcomings of his faithful servant. But nothing will quell Tupaia's grief, not even his beloved lorikeet, whose impossibly colourful plumage has never failed to bring a smile to the Tahitian priest's face, until now. He wails so hard and so long, it even seems to weaken him further as the hours pass. Thus begins Tupaia's own rapid descent, his despondency lending strength to his illness, and just 2 days after the death of his boy, William Perry must recount with rather poetic sorrow, his last sigh was breathed over Tayato, lying dead at his feet. The two will remain buried side by side for eternity, here in Batavia, a place far worse than the hell of their worst imaginings. For his part, Captain Cook's conscience is clouded, and he wishes to make clear to the Admiralty that, whatever else, it is not his fault. Tupaya's death, indeed, cannot be said to be owing wholly to the unwholesome air of Batavia. The long want of a vegetable diet, which he had all his life before been used to, had brought upon him all the disorders attending a sea life. He was a shrewd, sensible, ingenious man, but proud and obstinate, which often made his situation on board both disagreeable to himself and those about him, and tended much to promote the diseases which put a period to his life. As Tupaya and Tayato are only two of many of the Endeavour who keep succumbing to sickness, Joseph Banks decides, on the advice of the personal physician he has hired, Dr. Jaggi, to retreat to the country, as he does back in England, escaping back to Revesby Abbey when he can. In the company of Dr. Solander and Sidney Parkinson, he secures lodgings in a house nestled by a briskly running river, the jewel in a landscape that indeed reminds him fondly of the low country of his native Lincolnshire. Although Dr. Solander himself is desperately ill, it is decided that it is worth the risk to remove him to the new house in a gently handled carriage. While not long after they arrive, they received from the ship Mr. Sporing, our writer, a seaman, and the captain's own servant, who he had sent on hearing of our melancholy situation. Here, at least, they should all be able to get fresh air, far from the fetid canals and their lurking diseases. All up, Banks and his companions are attended by 10 Malay servants, of whom 5 are the landlord's slaves. It is as well, for from the first night in their new premises, Dr. Solander is so ill that the servants and slaves must attend him in shifts, applying fresh blisters to the inside of his thighs, while he lies there completely insensible to their ministrations. Yes, time and again, Dr. Jaggi applies to Dr. Solander's thighs a particular concoction of pasted powder made from blister beetles, otherwise known as Spanish fly, which causes blisters to rise wherever it is applied. For you see, as all expert medical practitioners know, by allowing the body to be drained of ferrous humours, it should alleviate the sickness. And indeed, by the morning, Dr. Solander seems to be marginally better, and continues to recover a little each day thereafter, so it has clearly worked. Myself, Joseph Banks will note, either by the influence of the Peruvian bark of which I had all along taken quantities, or by the anxiety I suffered on Dr. Solander's account, missed my fever, nor did it return for several days till he became better. But return it does, to fell both Parkinson and Banks once more. Banks hires yet more male slaves from the landlord, but is infuriated by their careful lack of comprehension and care. For not only are the Malay slaves, who alone we depended upon, naturally the worst attendants in nature, but they cannot understand even the most basic of the scolds Mr. Banks sends their way. Perhaps changing the genders of the slaves might help. Banks does exactly that, reasoning that at least the female slaves will have a maternal instinct, which will be a nice change from the studied indifference he's been paying for. Captain Cook, in the meantime, has also fallen so desperately ill back aboard the Endeavour that Banks feels obliged to return to him his personal servant William Howson. All the men are now more desperate than ever to get under way, to return home, and the Endeavour is in fact now fully repaired and fit to leave, but the bitter irony is that the men themselves are not. In the words of Joseph Banks, the people were so sickly that not above 13 or 14 were able to stand to their work. This is a dilemma. On the one hand, they have not really enough men to sail the ship, but on the other hand, if they stay much longer in this accursed place, they may have none at all. As ill as he is, Captain Cook monitors the best he can the health of all, notes in his log the daily taking on of provisions, and tries to judge at just what point they will have enough men healthy to get under way. About 20, he judges. Among his biggest worries, in fact, is Joseph Banks, who is now so gravely ill in his house by the river that no sooner has one fever broken than another takes its place. Every day thus, Dr. Jaggy must bleed him, nicking a vein in his forearm and catching the resultant scarlet cascade in a bowl so as to purge him of bad humours and hopefully reinvigorate his constitution. Could anything make the existence of Banks and his companions more miserable? Yes, and it now comes thundering from the skies. An early monsoon season that sees deluge all day and all night, day after day, night after night. Good God, why hast thou so forsaken us? The frogs in the ditches, Banks notes, whose voices were 10 times louder than those of European ones, made a noise on those nights when rain was to be expected, almost intolerable. And the mosquitoes or gnats, who had been sufficiently troublesome even in the dry time, now breeding in every splash of water, became innumerable, especially in the moonlight nights. This rain is not mere splashes, it bashes. Not a pitter-patter of no matter, but a sudden and stinging deluge of water that completely engulfs all beneath, a pounding precipitation that leaves everything not washed away completely sodden, before it suddenly stops. And now, just as quickly, the roar of receding water is replaced once more by the buzzing of mosquitoes and the whap and slap of damp English hands hitting slippery English skin, determined to slaughter the pests that plague them. And then, another deluge. Could they set off in weather like this? Late December 1770, Batavia, come what may, on our way. Captain Cook feels he can no longer delay his decision. As Christmas Day approaches, all the living, however sickly, are ordered aboard. Joseph Banks and Dr. Solander are carried on board, where they take to their bunks, both still gravely ill. They are greeted and treated by, as ever, William Perry, Merry Christmas gentleman, who in the time since, taking over from the late Surgeon Monkhouse, has barely stopped. And he has done well. Despite fears that they would lose dozens to the Grim Reaper, to this point they have only lost 7. Surgeon Monkhouse, 3 sailors, the servant of Mr. Green, and Tupaia and Tieto. Comparative success hitherto, he will recount, had so puffed me up that could the same call be made at this hour, after a long and painful experience in East India complaints, I should hardly feel more self-confidence. Now that he has Joseph Banks and Dr. Solander on board, he has little doubt that, though they are still gripped by dreadful fevers, he will be able to save them too. And yet, lo, the froth of youthful vanity how soon put down. For he has underestimated how badly their fevers have gripped them. He tends to them both, while also offering what succour he can to the other ill ones who have arrived back on the ship. But before long it becomes clear that it is in the hands of the Lord as to whether or not men will pull through. They heat up till it seems they must burn. They shake so badly they must be held down. They shiver as if caught in a raging blizzard on a South American mountain. They perspire to the point that the only thing left is to expire. But they pull through. And yet, while Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander have made it for the moment, whether they can make it all the way to England or even the next port is another matter entirely. For just when it seems these cursed illnesses appear to let go, they tend to rebound and reclaim their victims. It takes some time, the few healthy men all helping the many sick men aboard, but finally it is done, and they are indeed all aboard. But say, between them all, do they have the collective strength to move the capstan around and lift the anchor when Captain Cook gives the order at dawn the following morning, Christmas Day, 1770? The answer is yes, just, and only because of the collective desire to leave. At last underway from this infernal place, the best Christmas gift the men could have asked for from their captain, pushed along by a propitious breeze from the southwest, the Endeavour makes its way out of Batavia harbour, as an English ship, the Earl of Elgin, farewells it, with 3 cheers and the firing of 13 cannon. Even the Batavia garrison joins in, firing 14 cannon. The Endeavour returns both salutes, with the 3 cannon that remain to it, and is soon in the open sea once more. At last. Captain Cook takes stock. The number of sick on board at this time amounts to 40 or upwards, all suffering fever and lethargy in varying degrees. The rest of the ship's company are in a weakly condition, having been everyone sick except the sailmaker John Ravenhill, an old man, about 70 or 80 years of age. And what is still more extraordinary in this man is his being generally more or less drunk every day. True. Perpetually pickled. Like a barrel of sauerkraut, old Ravenhill is completely impervious to the sickness that continues to tighten its grips on the ship's company. Within 9 days of leaving Batavia, it gets to the point that after passing through the Strait of Sunda, Cook makes the decision to stop when they reach Prince's Island, near the westernmost tip of Java, known as Java Head, in order to recruit our wood and water and procure refreshments for the people, which are now in a much worse state of health than when we left. Again Joseph Banks must retire to his cabin, taken down by a fresh dose of fever, even as, with every day in port, even more men take ill. In the face of it, Captain Cook resolves in his journal that the Endeavour must push on for the Cape of Good Hope, on the southern tip of Africa, come what may, while recognizing there is every chance they will lose still more men on the way. The Endeavour, Captain Cook concedes ruefully, has now become my hospital ship. Chapter 14. Homeward Bound. 1 foot on sea and 1 on shore, to one thing constant, never. William Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. 4th of January, 1771, east of Krakatoa, dire straits. Such is life aboard the Endeavour, filled with the creak of the masts, the swish of the waves, the groans of the men, the stench of vomit, blood and festering sores. As the ship threads her way between the islands in the Strait of Sunda, sailing east of Krakatoa and on towards Prince's Island, the situation is grim and getting grimmer. Despite the hopes of Captain Cook that the open air and the sea would restore his men away from the vicious vapours of Batavia, quite the opposite has occurred. By the time they drop anchor at Prince's Island on the 6th of January, it is clear that the sick list is longer and deeper than when they had left Batavia. Fresh and untainted supplies from here will help, and it is with equal parts hope and desperation that Captain Cook writes, "The natives seemed inclined to supply us with turtle, fowls, etc., articles that I intended laying in as great a stock as possible, for the benefit of the sick, and to suffer every one to purchase what they pleased for themselves, as I found these people as easy to trade with as Europeans." It is a far cry from the swindling Rajah and his Dutch accomplice back on Savu. A little over a week later, the ship is fully resupplied, the wood coffer filled and the water barrels groaning, and they are ready to leave once more, only to find that the only wind comes from the rasping breath and dysenteric bowels of their sick sailors, and that is not enough to fill their sails. The following day they weigh anchor and sail west, leaving the Strait of Sunda on a light breeze. It is with great relief that they are on their way, as, despite many of them still being sick, it is imperative that they leave while they still can, entirely unaware that the spirit with the grim countenance, holding a scythe, is now on board, stalking the darker decks and looking for his next victim. Joseph Banks, drawing on his last reserves of Peruvian bark, rallies a little, at least enough to chronicle how bad things are, writing on the 20th of January, 1771, "Missed my fever today. The people, however, in general grew worse, and many had now the dysentery or bloody flux." Oh, the bloody flux. Things are bad, so bad that for the first time since the voyage began, Charles Green is not on deck searching the stars or shooting the sun, but is instead unable to rise from his hammock at all. Yet again the sea air seems to do little to improve the health of those on board, and on the morning of the 24th of January, 1771, John Truslove, corporal of the Marines, who Captain Cook notes as a man much esteemed by everybody on board, dies. "Many of our people at this time lay dangerously ill of fevers and fluxes," Cook chronicles. "We are inclinable to attribute this to the water we took in at Prince's Island, and have put lime into the casks in order to purify it." It just might be too little too late, as one of Mr. Banks's entourage, Herman Sporing, also dies the next day. For his part, Mr. Banks only feels as though he is dying. "Myself endured the pains of the damned, almost. At night they became fixed in one point in my bowels, on which the surgeon of the ship thought proper to order me the hot bath, into which I went 4 times at the intervals of 2 hours, and felt great relief." Yes, a small triumph for William Perry, who once more experiences a sudden shift in favour from James Cook. "Our captain," Perry will proudly recount, "turned to our profession for relief. Whatever slighting opinion of doctor or of medicines he had imbibed was now palpably changed, and his old looks of scowl and contempt gone." Perry harbours his own theories about what is causing the men to drop and rise no more. In an irony the natives of New Holland might offer a heartfelt tut-tut to, a batch of bad turtles bought at Prince's Island might be the cause. Every morning the ceremony of a knife drawn across the throat of the turtles, which had died in the night, or we thought dying, consigned some to the ship's cook, and this food hastened through the bowels like quicksilver, leaving as little nourishment. All those who had other than ship's provisions escaped the flux. Malaria, typhoid, dysentery, flux, turtle, whatever the cause, the result is the same. The tragic deaths continue, as none other than Sidney Parkinson, the brilliant young artist who has brought to life countless scenes over the last 2 years, also rasps out his last agonized breath, the quiet Quaker, now for eternity. Banks grieves as much as Banks can. He fears he may well soon follow, but can only muster the energy to record, "In the evening, Mr. Parkinson died, and one of the ship's crew." And yet, far more upsetting to those with still enough of a grip on the day to care is the death of drunken John Ravenhill, the only man who did not get sick at Batavia. From Ravenhill feeling nauseous to rasping his last had taken only a couple of days, and there is a strong feeling aboard that if the current sickness can take him, it can take anyone. Sure enough, just the next day, astronomer Charles Green, who has spent his life observing the heavens, now heads there, his soul departing this earth even while his wasted corpse is consigned to the depths with the other 2 men who die this day. All 3 are cased in canvas and cast off with a rapidity that allows no sentimentality, mortality trumping morning as ever more men teeter between life and death. For Captain Cook, the ongoing deaths are not simply a matter of grieving for good men lost, nor even the difficulties of continuing to sail the ship. Rather, it is a matter of these deaths reflecting on his captaincy. "He had long been in a bad state of health," Captain Cook records of Charles Green, "which he took no care to repair, but, on the contrary, lived in such a manner as greatly promoted the disorders he had had long upon him. This brought on the flux, which put a period to his life." For indeed, perhaps harking back to Captain Cook's Quaker influences, illness is a moral failing, or at least a result of it. Those who follow instruction and embrace moderation are well, or at least they should be. A certain uncharacteristic gloom settles upon Captain Cook. More than that, a desperate desolation about the deepening sickness on board settles on every sailor, and, as Captain Cook notes, increased to that degree that a man was no sooner taken with it than he looked upon himself as dead. In one case, one of the crew, who has been particularly helpful with other sick crew members without suffering any ill effects, suddenly comes down with a fever and other symptoms himself. "I've got the gripes," he cries again and again while stamping his feet. "I've got the gripes. I shall die. I shall die." So overwhelmed is he by dread of death, he actually falls into a fit and is carried to his hammock, only to, rather sheepishly, recover within a couple of days. He is one of the lucky ones. For Surgeon Perry, working in the gloom and stench, amid the oozing blood, mucus, and excrement, it's as baffling as it is frustrating. No medicine I could give had the least effect. Despondency gained ground. Each deceased sailor has D.D. written after their name on the muster roll. Discharged dead. A very definitive discharge in the way of these things. As sailors and marines keep dying, Captain Cook and Master Molyneux struggle more than ever to keep the Endeavour, now 200 miles southwest of the Strait of Sunda, fully manned every watch. It is now getting to the point that when William Perry shows Captain Cook the daily sick list, even the weary commander must acknowledge the tragic truth and say, "The vessel will shortly be left without hands to navigate her." In the meantime, those tars who can still climb the rigging and see the sails trimmed to the foul westerly wind must do so for ever longer hours on watch. Most are glad to stay up there for as long as they can, away from the deadly sickness that stalks the lower decks, prowls the cabins, and makes its way through the messes of the Endeavour. Helpless and hapless, the ship sails on, the remaining crew red-eyed, weary, and cowed, now bound for home or the shrouded depths of the ocean. It is just not clear which. True to form, the sick but still buoyant Banks displays an entirely characteristic gallows humour on the whole appalling situation, noting in his journal on the 30th of January, "One person only died today." As it happens, Banks is wrong about the improving death toll, as before the day is done, amidst the groans and anguish cries seeping unrelentingly from the mess deck, another 2 more men die. Just a day later, and Cook is in despair, as more die. In the course of this 24 hours, Cook records on the last day of January, we have had 4 men died of the flux, viz. John Thompson, ship's cook, Benjamin Jordan, carpenter's mate, James Nicholson, and Archibald Wolfe, seaman. A melancholy proof of that calamitous situation we are at present in, having hardly well men enough to tend the sails and look after the sick, many of whom are so ill that we have not the least hopes of their recovery. Worse still than a hospital ship, the Endeavour is now on the edge of being a ghost ship, overwhelmed by sickness, with the last men left standing engaged with sailing the ship, tending the dying, and consigning the dead to the depths.
This ends CD 16. CD 17.
An optimistic word in the face of this calamity, Joseph Banks? Yes. The wind, which came to east and southeast yesterday, blew today in the same direction, so we had little reason to doubt it being the true trade, a circumstance which raised the spirits of even those who were most afflicted with the tormenting disease, which now raged with its greatest violence. The long-longed-for trade wind now filling their sails is the one that should push them all the way to the Cape of Good Hope, on the southern tip of Africa, with barely a need for tacking. The only question remaining being how many of them will be alive to see it. Since we have had a fresh trade wind, Cook records, this fatal disorder hath seemed to be at a stand. Yet there are several people which are so far gone, and brought so very low by it, that we have not the least hopes of their recovery. Cook struggles to maintain dignity and discipline amidst the squalor of the situation. On the 4th of February, punishing Marine Thomas Rossiter with 12 lashes for a drunken assault of the officer of the watch. And yet, even a sympathetic commander stoically weathering the attending trials can incline to become blasé. As the lives of his sailors are extinguished with what has become monotonous regularity, on the 27th of February, Cook records, "In the AM died of the flocks Henry Jeffs, Emmanuel Pereira, and Peter Morgan, seamen. The last came sick on board at Batavia, of which he never recovered, and the other two had long been past all hopes of recovery, so that the death of these 3 men in one day did not in the least alarm us." At this point there is clearly nothing to be done, although Captain Cook continues to insist on discipline. Do something, anything, anyway, always ordering that the decks be scrubbed as clean as the day that they left England, using vinegar, that cloths be washed and dried, that copious lime be added to all the barrels of water, that the ports are to be opened regularly to allow fresh air to circulate. The sailors keep dying anyway. Early March 1771, His Majesty's hospital ship Endeavour. Good hope, grim truth. Sailing on the same latitude as Natal on the east coast of Africa, perhaps some 2 days' sail away, some of the crew claim to have seen the land dead ahead, or at least land. It is thought so improbable, however, Captain Cook, below in the great cabin, is not even told about it until well after the sun has gone down. He at once orders the crew to swing the lead and take soundings, but finding the ship has no less than 80 fathoms of the Indian Ocean beneath her, concludes that land is nowhere near, and they are in fact still 60 leagues from Africa. First light, however, brings a different story. For not only can they see land, but they can see and even hear the surf crashing upon it. They are just a few hundred yards off. "All hands on deck!" At least all hands who are able. Up from the lower decks, up from the stinking bowels of bloody hell, comes every sailor who can help. But can they? The ship, William Perry will recount, was stemming in upon breakers and the shore so close that little chance appeared of clawing off. After everything they have overcome, is this to be their fate? The wind blew right upon the shore, and with it a heavy sea ran, which broke mountains high on the rocks with which it was everywhere lined, Joseph Banks chronicles, so that though some in the ship thought it possible, the major part did not hope to be able to get off. Whatever the cause, it won't be without a fight from Captain Cook to save her, and as he bellows hasty orders to haul to the eastward, the jacks scramble to his tune. "Prepare the anchors and cables, trim the sails." It is a close-run thing, but yard by yard, clawing to the windward, the ship somehow miraculously manages to avoid the breakers and the rocky outcrops, being carried off by a favourable current moving along the coast. As Captain Cook records, after 4 hours spent in the vicissitudes of hope and fear, we found that we had got gradually off, and before night were out of danger. Against all odds, not for the first time, the Endeavour survives. By the time the Endeavour limps into the port of Simon's Bay, by the Cape of Good Hope, on the 14th of March 1771, no fewer than 26 men have died on the journey from Batavia, while Captain Cook records that another 29 men remain extremely ill. In fact, one ill sailor will die before he can even be brought ashore. It means that of the original ship's complement of 94, An extraordinary 34 men, more than a third, have now died since James Cook sent his proud letter back to England from Batavia, in which he stated that he had not lost a single man in 2 years to illness. The only good thing is that, quite unlike Batavia, the Cape of Good Hope is a place of health, hygiene and help, with first-class medical care, a place where the men can at least rest and recover. A sure sign that at least one of the ship's company is on the mend once more is that Joseph Banks is now well enough and frisky enough to record his positive appraisal of the ladies of the Cape of Good Hope. In general, they are handsome, with clear skins and high complexions, and when married, no reflections upon my countrywomen, are the best housekeepers imaginable, and great child-bearers. Had I been inclined for a wife, I think this is the place of all others I've seen where I could have best suited myself. Perhaps under the circumstances, for she must have been at least 20 lovers ago, Banks appears to have forgotten that once upon a time, just 3 years ago, not only was he inclined for a wife, but is currently engaged to take one, Harriet Blosset. 15th of March, 1771, Cape of Good Hope, ill met by daylight. At anchor in Table Bay now, Cook happily spies another English ship, moored nearby, the Horton, East Indiaman, sailing home from India, he presumes, and orders his men to row him over, so he may present his compliments to the captain. On board, James Cook is morbidly fascinated to learn from the Horton's captain that, although his ship left England a little over 12 months ago, she has already lost nearly 40 men to sickness, while a good many more are now suffering scurvy. This, the other captain insists, is not unusual. It is simply what happens on long voyages. It is to be expected, unless, as Captain Cook knows, you take strong measures to prevent it, as he has done. He had managed to go for nigh on 3 years without losing a single man to sickness. And if they had not been obliged to stop off in wretched, stinking Batavia, they might have been able to sail around the entire world without losing a man to sickness at all. But will he get credit for that? Highly unlikely. The Horton has lost 40 men after 12 months. He had lost none after 23 months, and yet their suffering will hardly, if at all, be mentioned or known in England, he notes with uncharacteristic bitterness, but entirely standard defensiveness in his situation, upon returning to his ship, when, on the other hand, those of the Endeavour, because the voyage is uncommon, will very probably be mentioned in every newspaper, and what is not unlikely, with many additional hardships we never experienced. It is quite true. As Captain Cook knows, the newspapers in England at this time are little more than scandal rags, making a hue and cry over nothing. It is just the way the press has gone in recent years. For such are the disposition of men in general in these voyages, he writes, that they are seldom content with the hardships and dangers which will naturally occur, but they must add others which hardly ever had existence but in their imaginations, by magnifying the most trifling accidents and circumstances to the greatest hardships and insurmountable dangers. Captain Cook struggles on, day by day, pondering the course of events nearly as much as he ponders the course for the day, worried his failure will be made much of, that he is about to be lambasted for his hospital ship, the Dead Men, no great southern land, and having the Endeavour come to grief on a reef. As the weather has turned sunny and calm, those crew who can are put to work fixing the topmast, overhauling the rigging, scrubbing the decks, repairing the sails, and painting the ship. After Batavia, this place is a delight, and over the next 3 weeks the ship's company so make headway in recovering their health that Lieutenant Gore feels so hale and hearty that he climbs all 3,600 feet of Table Mountain, just for the pleasure of the view. Captain Cook is able to fill out the ship's complement somewhat by hiring some of the itinerant sailors who can always be found at such ports, the flotsam and jetsam of the sea routes ready to go wherever they can get a berth, and even desperate enough to go on a sick ship like this. Speaking of which, ever eager for fresh greens before getting under way, Captain Cook sends some men to nearby Robben Island, home to both incarcerated criminals and vegetable patches. Joseph Banks accompanies them in order to do yet more botanising, and yet they are all back in a remarkably short time, quite shaken. For not only had they been told not to land by 6 Dutch soldiers, the fact they were holding muskets pointed right at them rather made the point. Cook decides he can do without the cabbages. Banks, in any case, has plenty of other things of great interest to concern himself with. Lately his scientific inquiries have occasioned him taking notes as to whether the native women of Cape Town have very large clitorises, or some sort of mini-penis at the top of their vaginas, for so the latter a sailor has told him. Banks firmly plumps for large clitorises. He also records a rumour he has heard whereby for marriage ceremonies the priest urinates on the happy couple, but he cannot definitively get to the bottom of either report before it is time to go again. Onwards. Not that the whole of the crew is so recovered and chipper, as Captain Cook records that when the Endeavour prepares to take its leave on the 16th of April, 1771, a month after arriving, there remain 11 men too sick to walk aboard. Again, of these, one man, the master himself, Mr. Robert Molyneux, dies just an hour after they are under way. Once more, Captain Cook is inclined to blame his death on his habits, not his habitat of recent times, nor simply disease. At 4 departed this life Mr. Robert Molyneux, master, a young man of good parts, but had unfortunately given himself up to extravagancy and intemperance, which brought on disorders that put a period to his life. The Endeavour stops at just one more port, between the Cape of Good Hope and England, St. Helena, a tiny English colony in the South Atlantic off Africa's west coast. The men of the Endeavour arrived just as a dozen English ships, East Indiamen, trading ships, are preparing to set sail back to the motherland, as part of a convoy under the protection of HMS Portland, as there is fear of war with Spain. Indeed, when Captain Cook spies so many ships together, his first thought is that it must be an armada, and the Endeavour is about to intrude upon a war. The captains of these ships prove to be most agreeable fellows. Why, they even know of the journey of the Endeavour already. Just how much they know puzzles Captain Cook and Mr. Banks. And they are honoured to agree to delay their departure by a few days so the late-coming newcomer can be safely escorted home. Still, before they set off, the ever-curious Mr. Banks must set off himself on a quick excursion to the highest spot on St. Helena. Spent this day in botanising on the ridge where the cabbage trees grow, visiting Cuckold's Point and Diana's Peak, the highest land in the island, as settled by the observations of Mr. Maskelyne, who was sent out to this island by the Royal Society for the purpose of observing the transit of Venus in the year 1761. In terms of the expedition, this excursion offers a neat symmetry. It is the spot where effectively the whole extraordinary journey had begun. And yes, when the transit of Venus had occurred on Tahiti, Banks had no particular interest. But this is different. The novelty of closing the circle in this manner appeals to him. As to Cook, he is simply too busy preparing the ship to sail. Fill those barrels with water, stack those supplies below, stow the boats, check the muster list. To go on such a jolly jaunt. On the 3rd of May, the night before heading for home at last, both Cook and Banks get a shock. For one of the commercial captains of the East India Company, already has a copy of many of the latitudes and longitudes that Captain Cook has made in his new discoveries. How is such a thing possible? They can't prove it, but Banks has his suspicions of an earless suspect. We found that many particulars of it had transpired, and particularly that a copy of the latitudes and longitudes of most or all of the principal places we had been at had been taken by the captain's clerk from the captain's own journals and given or sold to one of the India captains. Innocent or guilty, Mr. Orton is robust in his denials, which surprises no one. Captain Cook becomes doubly determined to get home as soon as possible, to give a first-hand account of their achievements before they are pirated out of their credit. The voyage home, by the Endeavour's rather dramatic standards, hitting a reef in the middle of the night, anyone, is singularly undramatic. The sailing is easy, the wind is with them, and some nights Cook and Banks take a cutter to dine aboard one of the other vessels, enjoying the hospitality and new conversation of their convoy comrades. But on the 24th of May, it becomes clear that their battered Whitby Cat Endeavour, so versatile yet sluggish, simply can't keep up with these India men in the open sea with a good wind blowing. The Endeavour loses sight of its company as the sun starts to sink in the west, and notwithstanding, we kept close upon a wind all night, with as much sail out as we could bear. There was not one sail in sight in the morning. While most of Cook's men are on the mend and out sailing, still some of them remain confined and ailing, none more than Lieutenant Zachary Hicks. The trusty lieutenant is so bad, critically ill with consumption, that at 1 o'clock on the 25th of May he dies, and that evening is committed to the sea with the usual ceremonies. Captain Cook feels the loss of this loyal lieutenant, so close to home and the chance to recover, very keenly. The only positive note is that it enables him to record the promotion of a most deserving replacement. This day, I gave Mr. Charles Clerk an order to act as lieutenant in the room of Mr. Hicks, deceased, he being a young man extremely well qualified for that station. It is a death 5 weeks later that most affects Joseph Banks, however. My bitch lady was found dead in my cabin, laying upon a stool on which she generally slept, Mr. Banks writes, with a tear in his eye. She had been remarkably well for some days. In the night she shrieked out very loud, so that we who slept in the great cabin heard her, but becoming quiet immediately, no one regarded it. Whatever disease was the cause of her death, it was the most sudden that ever came under my observation. As a point of order and a point of wonder, given that Joseph Banks is on this night sleeping in the great cabin, he finds it roomier, the lady is actually sleeping in what should have been Cook's cabin, while the commander of the entire vessel continues in his lesser quarters. Somehow the man who has presided over the whole voyage is in little more than a doghouse, while his proper cabin is currently occupied by a dead dog and a now weeping Banks. Sail ho! Sail fine on the starboard bow! From this passing ship, outward bound from Liverpool, Captain Cook learns on the 7th of July that no account had been received in England from us, and that wagers were held that we were lost. As improbable as it seems, the letters and documents he had sent upon the fast Dutch ships while still at Batavia have not arrived yet, and the Endeavour's arrival will come as a surprise and a relief to all. 10th of July, 1771. Aboard the Endeavour, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England. At noon, young Nicholas Young, the very fellow who had been the first to spot New Zealand off the starboard bow, is at the masthead, when he again spots a smudge, this time off the port bow. Could it be? Is it possible? Decidedly yes. 2 years and 11 months after leaving England, with 30,000 miles travelled, 5,000 miles of coastline charted, and many lands visited, the Endeavour is now approaching the most blessed destination of all, home. The cry goes up, "Land ahoy!" and better still, "England!" and is taken up around the ship. As ever, men come from below, crowd to the bow, and strain their eyes as that distant dawn blob comes ever closer, greener and more pleasant-looking. England. 12th of July, 1771. Land's End, to the Downs. Home, James, and don't spare the horses. They can practically smell home. It is a wonderful thing to make the English Channel proper, and by dawn of this day they are off Beachy Head, which, as everybody aboard knows, means they are just hours from dropping anchor in the Downs, the English anchorage just off Kent. At 3 o'clock that afternoon they do precisely that. And yes, the maritime tradition is that if a ship is sinking, the captain should be last off, making sure that everyone else is safe. But so too does the reverse apply. That is, when completing a successful trip around the entire planet, when you have achieved all your goals and ensured the safety of your crew to the best of your manifest abilities, so too do you have the privilege of being the first off the ship if you want it, once home, and Captain Cook certainly does want it. He wants to move fast, and his heavy sea chest can be sent on to him at a more leisurely pace. Only minutes after anchoring, thus Captain Cook, accompanied by Joseph Banks and the still seriously ill Dr. Solander, gingerly climbs into the longboat and is rowed to the docks, even as his crew crowd the gunwale to cheer him off. Awaiting them at the docks is a carriage, in which they settle for the 7-hour journey to London, each feeling extremely fortunate to have made it, and for good reason. Of the original 94 men who had left England 2 years and 11 months ago, only 56 have made it home. Unfolding their limbs and hopping down from the cramped carriage, the 3 sun-tanned explorers look out of place on the Piccadilly street, and they feel out of place, suffering an instant culture shock. After everything they have seen over these last 3 years, these lost lands on the other side of the world, it is an extraordinary thing to find themselves once more in London. The streets, the houses, the lanterns in the middle of the night. The coachman climbs to the roof to get down James Cook's small bag as the captain prepares to head for the Admiralty, while the other 2 keep going on to Banks's mansion in New Burlington Street. This is it. They have come a long way. They have accomplished much. But now is the time to say goodbye. There were times on the reef in Batavia and afterwards where they were certain they would never make it back alive. But, well, here they are. Oddly, there is not a lot to say. They simply shake hands, wish each other well, and then Banks's coach is on its way back to the botanist's Mayfair mansion, leaving Cook with his bag on the street, gazing at its receding form. What now? No Mayfair for him. Just returned from circumnavigating the world, humble James Cook picks up his small bag, as anonymous as a lost dog, and walks the darkened streets of London, all the way to the Admiralty, some 2.5 miles away in Whitehall. Certainly Lieutenant James Cook has been away from his home, wife and children for no less than 2 years and 11 months, and is anxious to be in the bosom of his family once more. But he is in no doubt as to where his priorities are. As a naval officer returned from such a long time away, his first duty is to report his return and hand over the precious journals that are the record of all that he has seen. He hands the night clerk his letter for Mr. Philip Stevens, Secretary of the Admiralty, then takes a seat in one of the drawing rooms. Endeavour Bark, Downs. Sir, it is with pleasure I have to request that you will be pleased to acquaint my Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty with the arrival of His Majesty's bark under my command, at this place, where I shall leave her to wait until further orders. And in obedience to their lordships' orders immediately, and with this letter, repair to their office, in order to lay before them a full account of the proceedings of the whole voyage. You will herewith receive my journals containing an account of the proceedings of the whole voyage, together with all charts, plans, and drawings I have made of the respective places we have touched at, which you will be pleased to lay before their lordships. I flatter myself that the latter will be found sufficient to convey a tolerable knowledge of the places they are intended to illustrate, and that the discoveries we have made, though not great, will apologize for the length of the voyage. I have the honour to be, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, James Cook. So, following his orders to the letter and to the last drop, the extraordinary James Cook waits patiently through the night to tell his tale and apologize for the length of his voyage. While Joseph Banks sleeps late in his Mayfair mansion, James Cook, after handing everything to the delighted Admiralty Secretary, Philip Stevens, at last heads home in the late morning via Whitechapel Road. Mid-July 1771, London, Banksia Man. Have you heard? The great Joseph Banks has returned to us. He is, of course, the talk of London, the toast of no less than the British Empire, which has expanded thanks to his genius and courage. Everyone is talking of the immortal Banks, this unequalled man, who has discovered worlds unknown, together with plants, flowers, trees, species of animals, birds and fish beyond number, and, just quietly, women beyond wonder. No less than Samuel Johnson boasts of spending time in the esteemed company of Banks, and composes poems to amuse him, while His Majesty King George III is delighted to receive Mr. Banks at Buckingham Palace, and receive his advice on plants, particularly for his pet project, Kew Gardens. In the meantime, every London gentleman's club, which is to say every club, longs to see him walk through their doors, in the hope he will regale all those gathered around with tales fantastical, and, just loudly, ribald. As the port flows and the air becomes thick with cigar smoke, he will lean in and move to the climax of the story. And then we saw it, completely severed. A collective gasp. Can you imagine? And then I showed him my musket. And so it goes. No serious society soiree is complete without lords, ladies, dukes and duchesses hovering nervously by the entrance, waiting for the man of the moment, the main attraction, the handsome, brilliant, rich, famous and deliciously infamous Joseph Banks to arrive. Infamous, you say? Well, yes, there is the rather more delicate matter of his broken engagement with Mademoiselle Harriet Blosset, who had heard rien, nothing, from him since that night at the opera, when he had left her without explanation and sailed the next day. After she had written to the gay young blade on his return, requiring an interview or explanation, Banks comes back with a 3-page letter, centering on one primary message. I love you. I profess it, but I am of too volatile a temper to marry. The nerve of the bounder! She, however, will not take non for an answer. She has spent 3 years of her glorious and perfumed youth waiting for him, and demands a meeting, so the scoundrel may say it to her face. Banks obliges, arriving unannounced, just as she is sewing him a waistcoat. Miss Blosset swooned, as one of the botanist's great friends will recall ruefully, and Mr. Banks was so affected that marriage was again concluded upon. Alas, alas, a few days later the cad, the bounder, sends another letter, calling the whole thing off again. Quelle horreur! London society is scandalized, deliciously. As one man in the Banks circle gossips to another, he leaves poor Miss Blosset in the most distressing as well as ridiculous situation imaginable. As a bare beginning, she refuses to sew another button to the waistcoat, though her feelings are slightly less mortified and just a soupçon more mollified when Banks makes a payment to her of £5,000. With that payment, poor Miss Blosset agrees to let the affair pass. And when it comes to affairs, Banks has other titillating tales. Let us gents just lean in to talk sotto voce of the anthropological nature of the sexual customs of Tahiti. 3 women at the same time, and the interesting customs in this field of the Tahitian royal court. The queen and her maid and her male lover, you say? All at once? And how surprisingly open it all is. A girl and her lover performing in daylight in front of the queen, and the queen yelling out encouragement. Extraordinary. So please do go on, Mr. Banks. Whatever you can tell us will be repeated endlessly by us in coming weeks, in strictest confidence, of course. The whole thing is fantastic, but marvellously true. At one royal dinner, of course held in honour of Mr. Banks, a prominent visitor and guest from the American colonies, a Mr. Benjamin Franklin, chronicles that Banks had unveiled important new learning upon the New World. For the Tahitians, Banks recounts to his enthralled audience, had no idea of kissing with the lips, though they liked it when they were taught it. And so do many of the beautiful women of London, when Banks offers them instruction too. As a matter of fact, however, the women of Tahiti have taught Mr. Banks sexual techniques that an English naval officer visiting Tahiti a short time later, one William Bligh, will chronicle as a sensual and beastly act of gratification, whereby even the mouths of women are not exempt from the pollution. For his part, Banks had been much less horrified at the time. But of course we have forgotten someone. For never let it be said that Mr. Banks achieved his feats on his own. There is someone else who deserves to be toasted, not as much as Banks, of course, for he too brought England glory. Gentlemen, I ask you to raise your glass to Dr. Solander. Yes, Mr. Banks, and Dr. Solander, and not to forget Banks, the celebrated duo are bound together in public acclaim, as they shall surely be for all time. Raise a glass, I say. Why, one cannot open a newspaper without reading all about them. See here, in the Public Advertiser of the 6th of August, 1771. We are creditably informed that the Endeavour, which carried Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander around the world, sailed many hundred leagues, with a large piece of rock sticking in her bottom, which, had it fallen out, must have occasioned the inevitable destruction to them all, and deprived the world of the agreeable discoveries they have reason to expect from this voyage. Glory be to God, for he appears most certainly to have preserved Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander for more of their wonderful work to come. And did you hear about this whole fothering business? Extraordinary how Mr. Banks managed to pull it off. It allowed them to once more stand on the solid ground of New Holland. Speaking of which, the world's greatest botanist, Dr. Carl Linnaeus himself, suggests that New Holland be renamed Banksia, for the man who conquered its last mysteries and brought such wonders from it. Why not? The Westminster Journal announces that no less than 17,000 plants, of a kind never before seen in this kingdom, have been brought over by Mr. Banks, which, we hear, are very likely to live in the royal gardens of Richmond. Why, Mr. Banks might as well live in the royal gardens himself. So much time does he spend with the King and Queen of England, and so well is he nourished while there. The Queen, so says the Public Advertiser, has been shown Mr. Banks's wondrous drawings from the voyage, full of curiosities, and they were viewed by her with peculiar pleasure. Ah, but when it comes to this voyage, there is another thing that is overlooked. For, of course, this voyage has not just produced enormous strides in the field of botany, but also whole leaps forward in the evolving science of navigation, and, as a direct result, whole new sections of the globe have been discovered and mapped. The Gazetteer helps to put the record straight. We are told on the best authority that Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander's voyage may be made extremely subservient to the purposes of navigation. They passed through 2 straits, which were before unknown. Former sailors had always doubled the land which contains them, and thereby performed several hundred leagues more sailing than, had they known these straits, would have been necessary. I tell you, there is nothing these 2 masters of the sea cannot do. King George himself is clearly of this view, as he is seen to apply his magisterial wiles to encouraging the discovering duo to embark on yet another voyage for the greater glory of Britain. Banks is to sail once more? Oh yes, the hope is now truth, as the Gazetteer and New Daily Advertiser tells its readers, Mr. Banks is to have 2 ships from government to pursue his discoveries in the South Seas, and will sail upon his 2nd voyage next March. But, say, who is that rather strapping fellow who sits in a London coffee shop every morning reading these reports, a shiny shilling gripped in his palm, ready for payment after he finishes perusing the praises of Mr. Banks? Well, they say he is an obscure naval lieutenant by the name of Cook, James Cook, and he apparently had something to do with the voyage himself. Still, there is little mention of him in any of the newspaper accounts, while Banks's fame grows daily. And yet, to be fair, it is not as if Cook's feat of sailing around the world and charting a fresh 5,000 miles of coastline across starkly different realms has gone entirely without notice. As a matter of fact, just 2 days after he arrived back in England, the London Evening Post of the 15th of July informed its readers of the agreeable news of the arrival in the Downs of the Endeavour, with Captain Cook from the East Indies. This ship sailed in August 1768 with Mr. Banks, Dr. Solander, and that is just the way the cook crumbles. Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander are celebrated famed adventurers, the toasts of London. Cook is the man who had the honour of taking them. James Cook is, however, deeply treasured by his family, as he deeply treasures them, and that is enough. As it happens, his family needs him more now than ever, as he has returned home to the shocking news that his darling daughter Elizabeth, named for her blessed mother and mourned by her, has died at the age of 4, just 3 months before Cook returned to England. And the baby due only a few days after I sailed from Plymouth. We called him Joseph, Elizabeth tells her husband softly, but we lost him 2 weeks after he arrived. James Cook has stared death in the face for months, has buried at sea and on land dozens of his ship's company, but nothing has affected him as much as this devastating news. At least his 2 lively young sons, Nathaniel and James, now so strong, so much taller, dance with delight in his presence. It is, thus, something of a bitter-sweet homecoming, the sweetness coming when he had knocked on the door of his own small terraced house to have it opened by the blessed Elizabeth, who tumbles into his arms, followed shortly afterwards by his boisterous and amazingly big boys, and the bitterness, the quiet tears coming when he hears the news of his other sweet children lost. This life of a Navy man is hard, and his family have done it hard without him. When things are more settled, by which time Elizabeth Cook is newly pregnant with their 5th child, James Cook is sure to make a rare visit back to Whitby. Now, of course, he is a land-lubbing lad no more, but returns a seafarer for the ages, here to tell the tale. He does go out of his way to proudly shake the hand of his old master, John Walker, who had been so good to him all those years ago. And yet James Cook's own pride is as nothing to the pride of Mary Proud, the Walkers' old housekeeper. Now, she has been told today to remember, Mary, that the boy you doted on all those years ago, and brought a candle to late at night when he pored over his mathematics, is now not only a grown man, but a sea captain who has travelled the world, and must be treated with respect, reverence, and deference, Mary, do you hear? But on seeing him in the flesh, so grand, so big, so esteemed, she cannot hold back, and joyfully greets the great Captain Cook with the name she greeted him with when he was but a lad. "Oh, honey James, how glad I is to see thee." The years fall away, and for a moment Captain Cook is no longer an esteemed naval commander, for it is Honey James himself who returns her warm greeting in kind, embracing this wonderful old woman with the respect and reverence she deserves. And yet Mary is not the only one eager to see him, for while London may be falling over for Joseph Banks, the people of Whitby regard James Cook as nothing less than their favourite son. This shipbuilding, sea-breathing folk know better than London what he has done, and certainly know how he has done it. He has sailed a humble coal carrier, one of their own Whitby cats, around the world, and discovered whole worlds, him, a shop boy, our James Cook. And yes, Mary, our Honey James. And yet it is not as if James Cook is completely forgotten in London circles. On the 10th of August 1771, a month after arriving home, he receives a letter from the great Joseph Banks himself, who is pleased to inform this fellow that he has put in a word with Lord Sandwich, who has recently been reappointed as First Lord of the Admiralty, his third stint in the role, and has managed to secure him a promotion. Yes, in short order he will officially be Captain Cook, not just as the captain of a ship, but as an actual rank of captain in His Majesty's Royal Navy. Sure enough, when James Cook is ushered into the presence of Lord Sandwich the next day, his promotion is confirmed. "Thank you, Lord Sandwich. Most gratified, Lord Sandwich." A few hours later, Captain Cook writes a humble letter of thanks to his benefactor Joseph Banks. "Will's Coffee House, Charing Cross, Sunday morning. Your very obliging letter was the first messenger that conveyed to me Lord Sandwich's intentions. Promotion unsolicited to a man of my station in life must convey a satisfaction to the mind that is better conceived than described. I had this morning the honour to wait upon his lordship, who renewed his promises to me, and in so obliging and polite a manner as convinced me that he approved of the voyage. The reputation I may have acquired on this account, by which I shall receive promotion, calls to my mind the very great assistance I received therein from you, which will ever be remembered with most grateful acknowledgments by, dear sir, your most obliged humble servant, James Cook." August 1771. Mayfair. Clubbed by Sandwich. What Captain Cook does not realise, because to this point the botanist has only confided in his dear friend Lord Sandwich, is that Joseph Banks has no desire for him to be a captain at all, let alone of Banks's next voyage to the South Pole. Yes, the South Pole. Banks is quite taken with the notion, as he writes to a friend, "Oh, how glorious would it be to set my heel upon the pole, and turn myself around 360 degrees in a second." For you see, by going to the South Pole, Banks will either have the glory of finding the elusive great southern land, which Alexander Dalrymple still personally assures him is right there, just waiting for an explorer brave enough, not James Cook, sniff, to find it, or at the very least expose it as a myth, which would be a lesser glory. Yes, as expected, Alexander Dalrymple has not accepted Cook's expedition as proving that the great southern land does not exist. And so, just as Captain Cook had envisioned, a second expedition around the bottom of the world must be mounted, this time on a grander scale with 2 ships, as added insurance against one of them coming to grief. So who should be the overall commander of such an expedition? Why, Joseph Banks knows just the man. Joseph Banks. No, of course he will not be the one doing petty things like setting specific courses and giving orders as to the sails and so forth, but nor will he be just the moneyed master. Instead, he will be the crowned commander of the Royal Naval vessels in this planned second journey. Why, look at the portrait that he has just had painted of himself, by the finest British society painter of the lot, Sir Joshua Reynolds. For Joseph Banks knows precisely the look he wants, and stages the whole thing. Yes, he was a botanist on this voyage, but for this portrait there will be not a plant or even a leaf to be seen, and not even any of the amazing animals or birds they have discovered. No, what Mr. Banks wants for this portrait is to look like an explorer, like one who has just returned from charting huge tracts of the previously unknown world. So we'll have a globe at my left elbow, a window behind where I can gaze without flinching onto the stormy, restless sea that awaits, and my logs before me, where I can document all the things I have discovered. For yes, he is the man to command the next voyage, born for the part. Captain Cook shall be ordered to follow my directions as to the time of sailing, from the several places we shall touch in the course of the voyage, Banks informs his friend Lord Sandwich. In other words, giving you the absolute command of the expedition? Sandwich responds. It is ridiculous. It is a thing that was never done and I believe never attempted before. Indeed? Well, Mr. Banks is used to attempting things others have never done before. Precedent be damned. It is to be a condition of my proceeding or not proceeding on the expedition, Mr. Banks replies. I suggest to you, replies Sandwich, that it would be fatal to the undertaking that the command should be in the hands of persons not under military law. Just as Alexander Dalrymple was not put in charge of the Endeavour, Lord Sandwich will be damned if he puts a civilian in charge of this next endeavour. Not to mention fatal to all if command of a ship is given to a botanist who does not actually know very much about sailing. Banks could see that Sandwich would not budge, and, undaunted, had gone on to press his next demand, in the strongest manner. The officers in both ships shall receive promotion by my means, he offers. What? A civilian giving out promotion to naval men, while their captain stands neutered? No. On he goes. If they don't look up to me for preferment, I shall be considered a nobody, argues Banks. This is another attempt on your part to get possession of the command, replies Sandwich. No, you are a nobody when it comes to the Navy, Mr. Banks. Your money and fame will not change that. Influence is one thing, formal command is another. I don't think Mr. Banks could be more clear, Lord Sandwich. Hold the relish. Indeed not. No, I'm sorry, Joseph, this is the way it must be. If this second expedition is to proceed at all, it will do so under the same structure as last time, with Captain James Cook in full naval command, while you will be in charge of matters animal, vegetable, and mineral. Banks now has no choice. He desperately wants to go on the second expedition, but the way it has been broken down, the only way he can do so is to accept James Cook as the commander once more, the very man who has proved how capable he is in such climes. Is Banks desperate enough to accept a berth under Cook's command once more? Reluctantly, yes. At least, however, this time Banks insists on travelling in the style befitting one of his eminence, and now proceeds to lavish thousands of pounds remodelling the two ships for his next voyage. On this voyage, we will have a French horn player. No, in fact, let us make it 2 French horn players, to accompany each other, and us, for the duration of the voyage. For I, Joseph Banks, Esquire, hero of the Endeavour expedition, wish to hear music when I please this time. And I shall also have my personal physician, more painters, secretaries, draftsmen, and servants, some 15 in all. Now, to accommodate such a large party will not be easy, and it doesn't matter to Joseph Banks that on the 28th of November, 1771, not 6 months since arriving home from the Endeavour voyage, James Cook is commissioned as captain, and has already selected a ship, the Resolution, another Whitby cat, which Cook is so happy with, he will chronicle it as the ship of my choice, and, as I thought, the fittest for service she was going upon of any I had ever seen. At 462 tons, she is 100 tons heavier than the Endeavour. The Resolution will be joined by HMS Adventure, under command of Captain Tobias Furneaux, former second lieutenant to Captain Wallace on the Dolphin. And yet Joseph Banks is far from delighted with the Resolution, regarding it as too small, far too cramped for his increased entourage, and he is underwhelmed as only he can be. Instead of having provided a ship in which an extraordinary number of people might be accommodated, he will later recount, they had chosen one with a low and small cabin, and remarkably low between decks. Mr. Banks, of course, objects, only to be told that there is no remedy for what he complains of. Well, we'll see about that. After Banks meets with his still dear friend Lord Sandwich, the First Lord of the Admiralty decides there is a remedy after all, and, as Mr. Banks will recount, ordered the cabin to be raised 8 inches for our convenience, and a spar deck to be laid the whole length of the ship for the accommodation of the people. Now we're getting somewhere. Joseph Banks also insists that an upper deck be built at the back of the ship, and he does not care even if it does cost £14,000. An extra upper deck? A new deck invented on a sailing vessel to accommodate you, Mr. Banks? No, you misunderstand, Captain Cook. The new deck will be to accommodate my party, my specimens, and various animals I hope to bring back. I shall take the great cabin entirely. But Banks will hear no buts. The building must begin at once. If not, the whole expedition will be doing without Banks's fortune, and without the great Banks himself. Very well then, Mr. Banks. A force of nature, by nature forceful, and backed by his extreme wealth and influence, even the Admiralty must reluctantly agree in these early months of 1772 to Joseph Banks's plans. The sailing date of the Resolution is delayed 2 full months to accommodate the changes to the accommodation. Captain Cook is ordered to supervise the labours. And so Mr. Banks's wooden castle in the air is actually constructed, even as he regularly brings various lords and ladies on board for luncheon parties to give them a tour of inspection. Scarce a day passed, Cook notes dryly, when the Resolution was not crowded with strangers, who came on board for no other purpose but to see the ship in which Mr. Banks was to sail around the world. And it is true that there are some with Captain Cook who wonder at the wisdom of all the changes. And they also wonder where on earth all of Mr. Banks's considerable goods for this 3-year voyage will go. And yet, as Charlie Clerk will later recount, Captain Cook never expressed his scheme of stowage to any of us. Which is odd, because it simply seems impossible they'll be able to get it all in, and yet Captain Cook shows no interest at all. There is one detail, however, that Captain Cook has a more than usual interest in. No ship may leave on assignment for the Royal Navy until an official pilot has taken it for a trial, with full crew, and declared it to be seaworthy. Captain James Cook can't wait. And sure enough, on the 13th of May 1772, after just a few hours on the water, the pilot at the Nore, the naval anchorage of the Thames, orders the Resolution to be turned around, as it is in danger of capsizing. The ship is unsafe. Lieutenant Charlie Clerk, his promotion to acting lieutenant by Cook while at sea had been confirmed by the Admiralty as soon as they arrived to England, breaks the news to Banks in a witty, jovial letter. Resolution in sea reach. Sir, we weighed anchor at Gravesend this morning, about 10 o'clock. With a fine breeze from the eastward, the wind from that quarter laid us under the necessity of working down the reaches, which work, I'm sorry to tell you, we found the Resolution very unequal to the task. For whilst several light colliers were working down with their whole topsails, staysails, etc., one small brig in particular with her top-gallant sails, these light vessels so upright that a marble would hardly roll from windward to leeward, the Resolution, I give you my honour, under her reefed topsails, jib and main topmast staysail, heeled within 3 streaks of her gun ports. Indeed, Mr. Banks, even in just a light wind, the water was within 3 plank widths, no more than a foot, of the gun port. They were lucky to get out of it alive. She is so very bad that the pilot declares he will not run the risk of his character so far as to take charge of her farther than the Nore without a fair wind, that he cannot with safety to himself attempt working her to the Downs. Hope you know me too well to impute my giving this intelligence to any ridiculous apprehensions for myself. By God, I'll go to sea in a grog tub if desired, or in the Resolution as soon as you please. But must say I do think her by far the most unsafe ship I ever saw or heard of. However, if you think proper to embark for the South Pole in a ship, which a pilot, who I think is by no means a timorous man, will not undertake to carry down the river, all I can say is that you shall be most cheerfully attended, so long as we can keep her above water. Sir, your much obliged and humble servant, Chas Clerk. In short, she is, to use that most withering of maritime expressions, a crank ship. Mr. Banks is not well pleased. Yes, Charlie likes to joke, but there is no mistaking that he has a serious message. Banks must reluctantly tear himself away from his society for a short time, and down to the Nore to see what minor modifications might be made to his luxurious accommodations. Fear not, it should not take too long to give whatever orders are necessary. I'll just nip down. And yet, as quick as he is, Banks is too late. For as Midshipman John Elliot records, while too many cooks might spoil the broth, it only takes one determined cook to right the wrongs of the past in a few short hours, and, after having received permission from the Navy Board to make seaworthy alterations, the next morning at daylight, I believe 200 shipwrights were cutting and tearing the ship to pieces. It means that when Banks's carriage arrives at the dock, the great man has no sooner alighted than he looks up to see an ordinary ship. The Resolution is back to being as it was, without a raised cabin ceiling and an extra poop deck, which will shortly see the poop hitting the fan. What follows would have allowed Banks to go to a fancy dress party dressed as Vesuvius, for in terms of sound and fury, the explosions of rage causing people to scatter in all directions, he is all that and more. If only Cook could be there to see it, he would no doubt be impressed. In fact, with discretion being the better part of valour, he has discreetly removed himself for the day. It had been, nevertheless, a day he had been expecting to come for some time, having noted as far back as the 28th of November 1771, in his private journal, "We had reason to think that she would prove crank." No matter. Mr. Joseph Banks, this man of the Enlightenment, has become the man of enraged entitlement, and his tantrum is a wonder for the ages, as Midshipman Elliot breathlessly chronicles. "He swore and stamped upon the wharf like a madman, and instantly ordered his servants and all the things out of the ship. To find himself under the necessity of taking such a step must no doubt have been a very great mortification to him, for he had put himself to great expense in all kinds of curious things for use, amusement, and pleasure." Within minutes, after the worst of the tantrum is over, there begins a kind of reverse Noah's Ark, as a parade of painters and popinjays leaves the ship, followed by doctors and draftsmen, silks and servants, and sailors laden down with baubles, bangles, beads, jars, tubs, instruments, canvases, lace, and finery, not to forget the underwater telescope. And finally off goes Mr. Banks to have a bloody word with Lord Sandwich and the Admiralty. With exquisite, if slightly suspicious timing, Captain Cook reappears, just as Joseph Banks recedes in the distance, still aflame atop his exceedingly high dudgeon, and pens a short letter of regret to Mr. Joseph Banks, late of the Resolution. "Sir, I received your letter by one of your people, acquainting me that you had ordered everything belonging to you removed out of the ship, and desiring my assistance therein. I hope, sir, you will find this done to your satisfaction, and with the care the present hurry and confused state of the ship required. Oh, and not to forget, the cook and 2 French hornmen are at liberty to go whenever they please. Your most obedient and very humble servant, James Cook. The letter is well constructed, with exactly the right buttoned-down, disciplined tone of Captain James Cook. While it contains nothing but the strictest civility, each sentence hits Banks like a slap in the face. Cook, a man who he could buy and sell 10,000 times over, is mocking him. Of course Joseph Banks tries to get his friend Lord Sandwich to intervene, but after bitter correspondence between the two, the good Lord comes down firmly on the side of Captain James Cook, his final letter to Mr. Banks finishing, "Upon the whole, I hope that for the advantage of the curious part of mankind, your zeal for distant voyages will not cease. I heartily wish you success in all your undertakings, but I would advise you, in order to ensure that success, to fit out a ship yourself. That, and only that, can give you the absolute command of the whole expedition. I am, etc." In other words, don't let the cabin door hit you on the way out, Mr. Banks, and good luck forming your own venture, which you can entirely pay for yourself. In a blind fury, Joseph Banks proceeds to take Lord Sandwich's likely sarcastic advice and decides in an instant to fund an entire voyage himself, beginning with buying a private ship for a voyage to Iceland, the South Pole being judged as too difficult in the short term, and determines to hire away Cook's officers as well. Lieutenant John Gore is only too happy to take Mr. Banks's shilling. Lieutenant Charlie Clerk declines Banks's poaching attempt. It is too late. He is on deck, and in His Majesty's service, and it would not be seemly to cut and run at such short notice, despite Mr. Banks's tempting bags of money. But Charlie Clerk does have some gossip about Captain Cook to pass on. It happened like this. Busy with the seemingly never-ending task of stowing, Charlie had taken it upon himself to ask Joseph Gilbert, the master, how, given things are so tight without Mr. Banks and his party and things, what the devil should we have done if we had all gone? "Oh, by God," Gilbert had replied offhand, "that was impossible." Charlie knew it. The whole thing was a farce from the start, and Captain Cook never intended to take Joseph Banks at all. The humble Yorkshireman simply gave in to all the rich Londoners' whims, knowing the ship would be unseaworthy. Simple, honest, plain Lieutenant James Cook has outwitted the great Mr. Banks. This report infuriates Banks, doubly so as he realises that he, an Etonian, has been outfoxed by a Yorkshire farm boy. And so Banks readies himself for what he has no doubt will be a famous trip to Iceland. James Cook? He sails off into nothing less than greatness.
You've been listening to James Cook, The Story of the Man Who Mapped the World, by Peter Fitzsimons, narrated by Michael Carman, published by Wavesound Audiobooks, an imprint of W.F. Howes Limited. This work is copyrighted 2019 Peter Fitzsimons. This recording is copyrighted 2019 Hachette Australia Audio.